Happy Friday the 13th. On today's Outside the Box reviews, we're taking a look at the NECA Cult Classic Hall of Fame Friday the 13th Part 2, Jason Voorhees. Now, Friday the 13th Part 2 is kind of a big movie for me in terms of Friday the 13th fandom. This is the first Jason movie I ever owned. It's also the first Jason action figure I ever bought. Now, this is kind of sad as a horror fanatic to admit, but when I got into the Friday the 13th series, the first one I ever saw was Jason X. And I did a little bit of research on the character. I was intrigued. I wanted to see more. I wanted to go back to the start. But I knew, just from pop culture info, that Jason wasn't in Part 1, or at least not the killer in Part 1. So I wanted to see what I knew, the iconic Jason. Unfortunately for me, I knew Jason was in Part 2, but I was really looking for Part 3, because I wanted the hockey mask. I was a little disappointed he never got the hockey mask in the movie upon the first watching. The figure itself, I ended up picking up at a Spencer's in about 2007. He was on clearance along with a couple other of the, at that point, older horror figures. So this guy is a little bit older than a lot of the figures I review on this channel. Jason comes with his display stand, and he kind of needs it to stand. He doesn't stand very well on his own. It's a simple kind of woodsy thing. There's a plank of wood down here. He has 2 peg holes. There's some other stuff. It's okay. I know part of the reason it exists is there is a, I believe it was a 30th anniversary pack they did for Friday the 13th with him, his mother, and then the altar from Part 2. So I think this is the same base he has in that one that would connect up to the other ones. But on his own, it's okay. It's nothing fantastic. The really cool accessory he comes with is Mommy's head. A really nicely detailed head, looking all shriveled up and nasty, just like it did in the film. I really dig this. The only downside is that she can't really stand up on her neck like that. She always topples over. So you kind of just have to have her lying down on the side and all that. But she's really gross and awesome looking, and I'm glad they gave it to us. As far as Jason's arsenal, you know the man's nothing without his weapons. We have his trademark machete here. It's pretty basic, not a lot of blood stain on it. It's actually a little small and flimsy compared to the ones we get later on from NECA and even the Part 7 Jason, which had already been released at this point. We got a pickaxe, once again nicely detailed. We got some good wood grain going down the side here, kind of old rusty looking metal. It's pretty decent. And finally, the weapon I pose him with most often is the spear from the double impalation. Really a fan of this weapon. It's really cool looking. It's very simple, but has a good effect. Now, the multi-pack one, I believe, came with at least one other weapon. I don't know if it came with more. I know for a fact it came with the pitchfork, and that's the piece I'm actually really jealous of. I would have much rather had the pitchfork than the pickaxe. I think it would have been a much more iconic weapon for Jason. He uses it a ton in the movie. That's probably his most used weapon in that whole movie, is the pitchfork. So, kind of a shame we didn't actually get it with this guy. On to Jason himself. This is old school NECA. This is back when I wasn't really the biggest fan of NECA. The articulation's limited, the sculpt is fine, but it really only works as a statue, kind of like the older McFarlane stuff. Another interesting side note on this guy is, with the Cult Classics Hall of Fame line, NECA used it, kind of like they're using the Icons line now, to put out figures they'd already released, maybe with some minor differences to them. They were still the big clamshell packages. With the exception of this guy, because this was the Jason re-release, but the Jason we'd gotten in the main line was the Part 7 big clunky Kane Hodder Jason. So this was the first time I'm aware of that they actually switched out the full figure. Here we've got him in his overalls, which are nicely sculpted, nicely colored and detailed. The easy part with these older Jasons is they weren't all that dirty and they weren't all that bloody, so you can get away with a lot more. But there's nice detail. He's even got the tag back here in the middle. His shirt is a plaid. I think the plaid he had in the movie was a little bit different. Not this pattern, but it still works as a plaid, I guess. Would have been nicer if it was truly movie accurate, but it's still pretty nice. So he has one fairly clean hand here, and the other hand is good and bloody. See bloody fingertips on there. If we spin him around, we could even see One of my favorite little details, he has the black thumbnail that he had in the movie. Now the paint on mine's a little off. It's not a really good coverage, and it's a little down the thumb instead of on the nail itself. But still cool they put that detail in. I really like that one. His boots are just simple, dark boots. They look fine. They're serviceable. Now I mentioned the head before, being the Sackhead Jason, which despite the fact that I was disappointed when I first watched that movie, I've come to really love this look. It's actually how I pose my remake Jason, is with the Sackhead. So I just really like the idea of it. And they did a pretty good job sculpting it. There's a nice depth there for the eye to be recessed back in it. You can see the ties coming down around the neck. With this on the head, you lose pretty much all articulation. It is built to kind of sit over the shoulders. But it looks right. It looks how it should with the character. I'm really happy they gave it to us. Now, you may have already noticed I already plucked the head off of the shoulder, because you could switch it out with another head sculpt. And here we could bring in the unmasked head sculpt on Jason. It's a decent representation of the actor who played Jason with all the prosthetics on. You can see he has some really poorly done stubble put down onto his neck. The brush strokes are just way too wide, and it really contrasts with the 5 o'clock shadow he has up here. But the mouth is really well done. He has a good hair lip up there. The nose is good. He's got the one good eye and the one droopy eye. This side of his head is full of all kinds of malformities and grossness. There's some sculpted hair on it, as well as the rubberized hair. He's got a strand up here, and this whole side of his head is full of rubberized hair. More bald spots up there. You can see the ear back there. The 5 o'clock shadow looks really good on him. Really crazy looking, demented looking. I feel from head on, it doesn't quite work. The neck's a little overly long, and it doesn't capture the character quite the way it should. But from a good angle, he looks pretty menacing and pretty awesome. For articulation, before I take this head off, you do get a ball joint with a good range of motion. If you put the sack head back on, you still have a little bit of that ball joint movement, but as I said before, it's very hindered by the sculpt of the head. He has ball jointed shoulders, so you can get a full 360 and just a little bit of in and out, not a ton. At the shoulders, he can swivel. Once again, limiting his movement a lot. It would have been so nice to get one of these with a good hinge joint. He can rotate at the wrist, and he can rotate at the feet. Altogether, that means Jason is not a very articulated figure, and really comes off as more of a statue than he does an action figure, which is pretty disappointing. It's funny because I've always liked this figure as it is, the fact that it is the Sackhead Jason. But on the other hand, this is the figure that sent me screaming towards Mezco, wanting them to be my horror action figure savior for the longest time, until NECA kind of took all the licenses back and started kicking butt like they have recently. These old figures just are too much of a statue for my taste, and they're really not what I want out of an action figure. Just overall cooler ways to pose them, and I just don't get what I want out of these figures. On the other hand, this is also the figure that started my obsessive Jason collecting. I got this guy, and I'd seen at the store that they had a Part 6 figure, and I immediately ran back and got him, because I'm like, hey, I've got the cool Baghead one, I want one with a hockey mask on now. So I ran back for that one, and then I was like, hey, I've got the one with that hockey mask on there. And wouldn't it be cool to have the one from Part 3? And all the other movies. And it started a major obsession of getting all the Jasons I could, until now I have almost every single one made in this scale commercially. So I don't know where to draw the line on recommend or not recommend on this guy. If another company made a Part 2 Jason, it would be so much easier to recommend or not recommend him just on what somebody else did. If some other company made one in this scale that was crummier than this guy, I would urge you to buy this one. If another company made one better than this guy, I'd urge you to forget about this one. But seeing as he's all alone at the 7-inch scale, I'm going to give him a mild recommend. Maybe you could pick him up on eBay. We're about a month away from Toy Fair 2012, and according to their Twitter, NECA is revealing some Jason Voorhees stuff. I don't know what in the world we're going to see from them, But I got my fingers crossed that it's going to be something worthwhile. With most of the figures being done before, I don't know if they'd go back and redo this one. But we could always hope for something cool coming out of that. This has been another Outside the Box review. Stay tuned for more to come. And remember, on this Friday the 13th, stay away from Camp Crystal Lake. It's got a death curse!